Ladies and gentlemen, it has been 2 o'clock in Europe and 8 o'clock at the East Coast of the United States. So I propose that we start this special session. It's the breakout session organized by the local network of the Netherlands with the title Stakeholder Engagement to Achieve the SDGs. As you may see in the slide, you can double click it and then you could enlarge it. You see a quite strict schedule. In 45 minutes, we will run through a panel and then we will give you ample time through written comments and questions. And you, if you type it, I will read them and post them to the panel. So I hope you are in agreement with that. So my question then is if our ambassador, Karel van Oostrom, already joined us. And if so, then I could pass the floor to him. I will have him to start talking. To not lose too much time, as soon as he is able to talk, he could start. But then I would like to pass first the floor then to the panel with the most important question is why did you choose this topic, stakeholder engagement? That's the why question. Why is it necessary to have stakeholder involvement? Couldn't you do it alone as a company? Goes faster, perhaps. Or why do you need them to understand the problem? That's perhaps the question. And did they really change your plans, your original plans as a company? Is it worth it? Of course, I'm phrasing this in a negative way, but of course I expect some remarks on your side that it is of course of added value. So it's a leading question. And of course then the interesting question here is as well, how do you organize it as a company? And also the scientific input has posed these questions as well to companies. So these are some questions we are going to talk about. So since, again, the question, the ambassador, is he already in? If not, then I would like to ask Ms. Saskia Kapinga of Shell Netherlands to open the floor.
Sure. I hope everyone can hear me. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, perhaps for some of you. My name is Saskia Kapinga. I look after external relations for Shell. And I'd like to start off by saying thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be here, virtual event, but still I feel very much part of a warm community. And it's an inspiring event. It's an event for me that, tells me that there are a great many people, organizations and companies working together, coming together to join forces on the journey to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a bit, I choose the word journey quite specifically because it is a bit of a journey. And I think realistically, we do have some distance to go still to achieve some of the goals that we're after. You might have heard of an African proverb that says that if you want to go far, if you want to reach those distant goals, you should go together. And I totally agree. And the proverb also says that if you want to go fast, you should go alone. And that's where I don't agree. And I'll tell you why. Because that's what my presentation today is all about. I think together we can go further, but together we can also go faster. Let me share with you how we did that with Shell in the Netherlands. And I'll do that by focusing on three things. Firstly, I'll talk a little bit about the external context. Then I'll talk about our approach, how we shifted from a company-centered stakeholder approach to a society-centered stakeholder approach. Tell you more about that. And perhaps people can go on mute whilst we're presenting. That probably makes it easier to hear.
Oké, ik zet hem klaar en dan kijk ik of ik het beeld krijg. Oh ja, oké.
Whilst we're presenting. All right. First off, though, this is perhaps the most exciting slide of my presentation. In many words, basically what it says here is that you should not buy shares based on what I'm telling you today. If we go to the next slide, please. So, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals in Shell, having a look, especially at this time of uncertainty, COVID-19, consequential economic crisis, many questions about equality, a lot of things changing. And I think for us as companies, it's time to look at how we can continue to contribute to society, especially at this time. And that brings me to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think these are the areas where we can and should contribute. For us at Shell, there are three goals where we can make the greatest contribution, I think. It's Goal 7, which is about affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy. It's about Goal 8, decent work, economic growth. And it's about climate action, which is Goal 13. And we do that specifically that last one in the Netherlands by identifying and realizing energy transition projects together with our partners and our stakeholders. And I'll get to that. Now, as I mentioned, a quick look at the external context in which we're trying to do this and some of the opportunities and perhaps issues we see there. Now, this picture you will recognize, right? Paris Agreement, very important, absolutely essential, I think, to achieve some of these Sustainable Development Goals. So that's a very positive agreement and we fully support it. But at the same time, in the external context, we see a couple of other trends that I'd like to mention. In many countries, and certainly in the Netherlands, what we see is polarization. So polarization of society and the debate that takes place here. We see a decreasing trust in government, but also in institutions, organizations, and companies. We see growing concerns about the impact of heavy industry. We see low understanding, poor interest in energy systems. We see very fast communications, and that includes fake news. It includes real news. And, people living a little bit in their own bubbles where they find their own news with their tone and sentiment that suits them. And we see increasing globalization. And what does that mean? An international or global approach versus a local approach. And in that context, where there are some opportunities, but there's certainly also some issues, I think stakeholder engagement is becoming increasingly challenging, but also more and more important. If I zoom in a little bit more to the situation in the Netherlands, and I've worked abroad almost all of my life. This is my first job in the Netherlands. And what I found here, unlike other countries, there's a very strong focus on the energy transition. And I think that's fantastic. And I think it's needed because this country lags other countries in the energy transition. Also, growing concern and criticism on the impact of heavy industry. Huge expectations around transparency for companies. Very high expectations of government, but also big companies in general in terms of their contribution to society. And for Shell specifically, our reputation, our position is under pressure. We're predominantly seen as an oil and gas company, if you will, representing the past and not so much the future. Add to that trust levels in the Netherlands for Shell are quite low. Again, we're perhaps seen more as a part of the problem rather than being part of the solution. And that left us in a little bit of an isolated position. And where do you go from there, right? Because for all of our resources, the clever people we have and the financial capacity that we have, we can't realize the energy transition by ourselves. I compare it to sports sometimes, and my sport happens to be field hockey. And you know what? You can be the world's best hockey player. But I can tell you, you will not win any medals on your own. It's the team that matters. And it's only with a strong, motivated team that you have a chance of winning or achieving your goals. Same goes for Shell and the energy transition. So the energy transition, I think, like achieving many of the SDGs, is a team sport. We've got to work together with other players, government, NGOs, companies, academics. But as I said, Shell was in a bit of an isolated position. How would we manage that? How could we join forces? Again, looking at my own situation, playing hockey, if I take my children on for a game of hockey, they will look at me saying, well, you know what? You're old news, Mum. Get out of the way. You're not good enough. You're not joining our team. They wouldn't necessarily pick me voluntarily to join the team. So if I want to get them to agree for me to be part of the team, I'll have to put in some work to show them I do know how to play, and I can actually score a couple of goals for the team as well. Same goes for Shell in the Netherlands. We had to have a close look to see how we could turn things around, going from an isolated position, and you see it here, our president director here on the right, with the prime minister of the country, and the gentleman on the left is the director for Greenpeace, looking full of expectation at Shell. Why would you join our team, and what can you do? We had to change things around. So what did we do? Well, we moved, and what you see here, it's my only theoretical slide, I promise you. You see here a very traditional stakeholder approach, right? So you have your company, in this case Shell, with its objectives and its targets, and to achieve those, you liaise with all kinds of stakeholders. You see a couple here: governments, employees, unions, communities, suppliers, special interest groups, you name it. And in that way, by creating a dialogue, you hope to get closer to achieving your objectives. Well, in the Netherlands, as I said, we were in quite an isolated position. That didn't work for us anymore. We had to change things around. So what we did is we said, instead of having a company-centered approach, we're going to look at a society-centered approach. What we did is we looked for a shared purpose. So where did our purpose, the Shell purpose, overlap with society's purpose? Where did we find common ground? And perhaps no surprise, for us that was in the energy transition. And perhaps even more in the acceleration of the energy transition. Why? Well, for Shell it makes perfect sense, because that provides us with new business models and opportunities to invest in. And for the country, for the Netherlands, accelerating the energy transition would provide opportunities in terms of economic development, right? So investments mean economic progress, but also environmentally, from a climate point of view, you would reach your targets sooner by accelerating the energy transition. So you can see the win-win from a company point of view and a societal point of view. So great, we found our shared purpose. And then what? What happened with those stakeholders? You see them there, still around them, and still around that circle, energy transition. But what you see happen is that these stakeholders, to be successful, they will become your partners. You will have to work together to achieve that shared purpose. You are no longer trying to convince people that your objectives, are important or relevant. No, you're working to the same goal. You've become partners. What does that take? And it sounds simple. It sounds like an open door, perhaps. But that means, as a company, you have to really open up. You have to listen. You have to engage. You have to work together. You have to accept some of the differences that are there and your different views. And you have to continue focusing on your common ground. We've done that quite practically, for example, in the way that we communicate societally, via a newsroom setup, whereby on every discussion, even if it's on social or digital media, we know what discussion takes place, and we will have a voice in there and contribute in a positive way. And that goes for digital media, it goes for engagement with all of these now partners, and it means making yourself a little bit vulnerable sometimes as well, which can be a little bit scary.
Saskia, perhaps...
So what did we do, right?
Sorry to interrupt, but the slides got stuck somewhere, I think, and perhaps you could think of the time. Thank you.
We will move on. Yeah, sure. So what did we do, having agreed on the societal approach, is we said, I come back to my hockey comparison. Once you have a team, you also need to make sure you have a good playing field, right? And I know in hockey what you need a water-based field, you need the best turf you can get so that the ball actually moves really fast towards the goal. Now in the Netherlands we saw to have that playing field, and we identified what was needed for that. We joined forces and said, okay, so how are we going to build this playing field so we can play a good game here and actually be successful in where we want to get? So we started forming a coalition with 4 companies, and those were 4 companies from the shipping and manufacturing industry that we've asked to join us based on the fact that they also had high emissions output. We joined forces and said, look, do you see the shared opportunity? They did. And can we identify and define what it takes for us to make it happen? We did that, and whilst we were working on this, we had more than 60 other companies joining us in this coalition who said, look, your shared purpose is also what we would like to do. We would also like to invest in the energy transition, and we'd like to accelerate it. Remember, this was not about Shell. They didn't join Shell, they joined shared purpose. We identified 4 areas where we needed to create the playing field, and these ranged from setting up an investment authority. We've called on the government to have more focus and prioritize the energy transition via a dedicated climate minister. We've asked for an independent authority to monitor progress across all the different governments every 3-4 years. And in that way, with those 4 asks that we had, we said, look, if this is the playing field ready, we will play. We will start investing. Now, if you go to the next slide, Mahina, what you see here, you just saw the picture of our president director with the prime minister of the country and with the director of Greenpeace. The second picture was taken just a couple of minutes later, after we had explained what the shared purpose was all about and what we would be working towards. You see here the director of Greenpeace reaching out to say, you know what, if that's what you're working on, we will support. For us, that's quite unexpected. That's a partnership that is really quite unexpected. Shell working together with Greenpeace, or at least agreeing on the common purpose, is quite a step forward, coming from an isolated position. So even there, so stakeholders becoming partners to some extent. Now, good story, all of the 4 asks were actually accepted, and we were successful in getting these through via the government and the Ministry of Finance. It has helped us to become more relevant and to actually be one of the team. It has helped us to make sure that stakeholders have become partners and we focus on a common goal, and that we are now working via, and I'll give you some examples, to actually accelerate the energy transition. So some examples here, we've invested quite significantly.
Sorry, Saskia, I have a second interruption because we have all problems with the slides. They got stuck somewhere at number 3. And also the time is down.
The time's up. I've got 1 minute, yes, Hugo, okay. and then I'm done. Yeah, so besides the partnerships on a common purpose, once you achieve these, the playing field is ready, if you will, it's time to demonstrate that your money is where your mouth is. So that's where the partnerships then turned into actual investments, in this case in big hydrogen projects, for example, together with our partners. For example, we've now proposed the biggest green hydrogen plant of Europe to come into the Netherlands. And we're working on that together with partners. So again, that partnership model and using your societal approach to turn stakeholders into partners has helped us quite a lot. I will leave it at there. So just to recap, my presentation really was about turning stakeholders into partners, working together on your shared purpose and the opportunities that we see there.
Thank you very much, Saskia Karpinga. The last slide was again in the picture. So, and in the end of the meeting, we will offer you an opportunity to, for all the people who are in the meeting, which is almost 200, to ask for the slides and also to respond to some questions. So now I see as well as our ambassador, Karel van Oosterom, is in our meeting. And of course, I would have given you the floor to start with. So please, Ambassador, could you say some words to us?
Hi, Hugo. Let's first do a sound check. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Well, thanks very much for organizing this. And Saskia, thank you so much for your very interesting lecture you just gave us. I'm in New York. Normally, I would have had the honor of having you in my home. Instead of that, we are talking virtually. And we're still here in New York in what I would call an unintelligent lockdown now for 3 months. And I'm jealous of all of you who have much more freedom than we have here. And here in New York at the United Nations, we work very hard to address the current COVID-19 crisis. And the Secretary General has made the 5th pillar of what he's trying to achieve. He's labeled it Recover Better. And I think that connects very well to the conversation we're having here. For the UN, recovering better means implementing the Paris Agreement, implementing Agenda 2030, and making the world also a little bit more just. And here at the UN, the private sector has a crucial role to play, and that's why this conversation is so important, and why I, as a representative of the Dutch here, am so proud of what Dutch companies have been doing in the past 10 years, one can say. And Hugo knows intern at Unilever who worked at the Economic Council and is now currently working at Randstad. And he told me 4 years finished his studies that the Dutch private sector is moving from doing no harm to doing the right thing, from corporate social responsibility to contributing to Agenda 2030. And that's why this conversation is so important. I'm really looking forward to hear from Dutch companies what they can do in this context, so that together we can make the world a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more just, a little bit more green. And thank you so much for this conversation, Hugo. Thank you.
Okay, Ambassador Karel van Oostrom, thank you very much for your inspiring words indeed. So that brings me to Brechtje Sporenberg of Royal KPN to address us.
Thank you, Hugo. Could you all hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Do you also see the slide?
No.
Oh, that's a pity. Let me verlezen wel. Start. I guess now you see the slide?
I don't.
It says that I'm sharing a screen now. Am I?
That's the way to do it. Yes, there you are. Yes.
Ah, very good. Well, my name is Brechtje Sporenberg. I work for KPN, the leading telecommunication provider in the Netherlands. And well, we have a lot of experience with stakeholder engagement in order to achieve the SDGs, about which I will specify one example today. This is our value creation model, which I will not go deep into detail into it. But what I want to share here is that we have at the left side our assets, we have our strategy, and in blue the outcomes. And what you see on the upper right is that we create long-term impact on society, and our long-term impacts are directly linked to the 3 SDGs that we have the most impact on, which are SDG 9, 11 and 12. For today, I will do a deep dive on SDG 12, for which we have very clear and, in my opinion, a rather successful stakeholder engagement. And it started in 2011 when we achieved our first goal on 100% green electricity. Our next goal was to become climate neutral for our own operations, a goal that we achieved in 2015. After that, we wondered what would be the best next step to take, because we were quite ahead of other companies in the Netherlands. Most were still working on green electricity by then. So what we did a stakeholder engagement with NGOs, universities, other companies, and also suppliers about what would be our next step after becoming climate neutral. And the things they came up with, we made targets out of them, for which one very big one, an important one, is the 2025 to have circular operations by then. This is a much bigger goal than the goals that we set before, because this touches all the part of our operations of whole KPN. Also, we designed some targets even more further away for 2030 and even 2040 for reducing energy and also getting a fossil fuel-free car fleet. But for today, I will focus on the circular operations and how we deal with the stakeholders. Our circular economy approach, we still had to invent it by then. Our stakeholders, this should be our next step, but then we didn't know how to start. So what we did, we engaged with NGOs who are specialized in circularity, and they helped us to discuss that we needed a program, and we have 4 pillars in this program. First one is reduce. We want to reduce the use of virgin materials. So we want to have less materials in our organization. Secondly, we want to use the products that we buy longer and better. So we want to extend the lifespan. And then at the end, if we want to get rid of materials, we want to recycle them as high end as possible. So if we have mobile telephones that we want to recycle, we prefer to recycle them as a mobile telephone and not to take them apart. But if they're broken, of course, we do take them apart and we make sure that we reuse the materials. The third one is energy efficiency. Overall, we should also focus on the energy efficiency of our network infrastructure and end user equipment.
Oh, I'm afraid Brechtje suddenly left us together with her slides. I don't know how quickly she will join us again. Let's improvise again. Karin, are you ready to improvise with me? And let's take the time because, yeah, okay. Thank you very much. So let me introduce you, Karin Maas, to you. She's the professor who works on the broader scale. We have seen now 2 examples of 2 companies, Shell and KPN. And of course, we were curious, how is it in a much more broader let's say, alliance of companies. So please, the floor is to you.
Okay, thank you. It doesn't seem to work to beam up my presentation. Now it's possible, I think. So technique is always a bit difficult.
Yes.
And otherwise I would just tell my story. So thank you, Hugo. And indeed, we were very curious about the situation amongst all the companies in the Netherlands, because I think we are in a very specific position. So in the Netherlands, Saskia already told us a little bit about it. We are very used to work together with stakeholders. And I think there is also common knowledge and common sense that if we really want to achieve our sustainable development goals, that business, civil society and governments have to work together. They have a very important role to play to actually achieve the sustainable development goals, and working together will speed it up and bring us even further, as Saskia already introduced us to this statement. When you look at it from a more research and academic perspective, there are different ways why organizations actually are involved in trying to achieve and contribute to the sustainable development goals. And there are 3 main reasons for it. The first one is because it pays off. The second is because I have to. And the third one is because it should be, or I should be doing this. So it is very important for me as a company to actually contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And reading a lot of academic research papers, that gave us the idea that depending on the motivation to work together with stakeholders, that will actually have a huge impact and influence on the way you will cooperate with stakeholders. And that's interesting in itself, because you can imagine that when you involve stakeholders in your company because it pays off, you will probably ask the question, okay, what do you think that I should be doing? Or are you happy with the things I am doing? So this is not really cooperating by itself, but it's more sending your story to the stakeholders. So depending on the motivation you work with your stakeholders, you will have different approaches. And we separated out 4 approaches working with stakeholders. So stakeholder consultation, which is more from the I perspective towards the stakeholders. So I've been doing some things, and how do you feel about it? What do you want to hear about it? Was it good enough? So it's more the I perspective. A second approach to stakeholders is more stakeholder engagement or stakeholder dialogue, and one step further, stakeholder engagement. And that's more, okay, I am the things I'm doing. What would you like me to see doing? So it's more the I and the you perspective in combination. So it's starting already a little bit cooperating, discussing, perhaps even working together. Another approach for stakeholder management or working with stakeholders is more stakeholder involvement and stakeholder partnerships. And then it shifts from the I and the you into a we. So together we can do more. Together we will probably be able to solve actual problems. And in this research we have been conducting since a few months now, we have sent out a survey to a large group of companies in the Netherlands. So we have sent it to the UN Global Compact members, but also to a large sample of sustainability managers and sustainability experts. I think sample size was now about 500 or 600. We will also use LinkedIn groups to actually make sure that a lot of companies fill in our survey, because what we would like to untangle is actually the combination of those perspectives. So the motivation, the approach taken by companies, and the potential impact of the partnerships and the cooperating with the stakeholders. So in conjunction with the survey, and luckily I don't have to do it all by myself, but we work together with a terrific group of academics and also practitioners to make this happen. We also conduct 15 interviews with CEOs to actually dive in a bit deeper. So if you have chosen for a specific approach, why was that? And what was the main reason? And what are the main hurdles to actually improve your approach? And where do you think are the main opportunities to, well, improve your approach even further to be able to achieve more impact than you have done until now? So the research started in March and will probably run until August or September. And please let us know if you're interested. And based on the research data, we will write a framework or a handbook or at least some advice for other companies how to best work with stakeholders. Of course, depending on the sector, on the position you're in.
So, yeah. Karin, thank you very, very much. And in the end, in the chat box downside, when we finished, you can click on the link, not only for the presentations and the slides, but also to, let's say, to think with us and to deliver input by answering some questions Karin was giving it. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I already saw a question about the relation between companies and government, but that is a beautiful point to give the floor to Stephen Collet. He works at he's a director for sustainable economy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. So Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hugo, and good day to you all. It's very inspiring to be part of this global action. The global we, as Karin just mentioned it, It's a very powerful manifestation also of SDG 17, I would say, and let's hope that we can all be connected despite the digital difficulties. If we are to achieve the global goals, we require bold multi-stakeholder partnerships. And this starts with engagement, and that has been expressed very clear today through compelling examples, I think, by the different speakers. For us, this is quite obvious, as we are a small country that is highly globally integrated. And I think the presentation by Saskia Kapinga provided some of the rationale for that. It should be obvious for any country, by the way. Corporations like the ones presenting today know that their businesses will not be future-proof if they do not work closely with their stakeholders, like Brechtje also from KPN mentioned. They need to put sustainability, human rights, and also responsible supply chain management at the center if we are to build back better after the crisis of COVID-19, as my minister Kaag expressed yesterday during a panel on business and human rights. The Dutch government engages with the poverty, inequality, and climate change. We need their market pull. We need their innovation drive, entrepreneurship, and responsible business conduct for sustainable development. So that's why we work, Hugo, corporate and government together. And it's a win-win, as it provides business with new opportunities as well, as Karen just mentioned. We have put public-private partnerships center stage in the Netherlands. And this is also why we drive voluntary multi-stakeholder partnerships in key sectors, 10 key sectors in international trade, including food, financing, retail. Take the textiles and garment sector, for instance. Companies representing over 60% of the Dutch market joined forces with Dutch trade unions, NGOs, government, for collective action to ensure responsible supply chain management. We have an open dialogue, and engagement remains strong as ever, even during this crisis, which is, by the way, a huge crisis in the producing countries. From our end, we facilitate these partnerships by co-financing, aiming at concrete action, and we link them to European initiatives to scale them through investment. I'm not going to dwell too much on it because I want to keep the floor also for some questions, but I think we succeed in businesses, also SMEs, engaging them to become a force for the good and building through this a resilient economy, a Dutch economy, but also a deeply integrated in a more resilient society in producing countries. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Steven. That's already a part of the answer. I will come back because the question about the dialogue between government and business and others, by the way, the list of stakeholders is much longer, of course, but we will come back to that because there were one or two questions already about that. I don't see Brechtje yet back. So this brings me indeed, let me continue with this question because the panel has had its word and we have several questions. If you allow me, I give a little bit of priority to the remarks about, of course, the stakeholder engagement and perhaps a little bit less about how far is, let me be very blunt, I'm a Dutchman, there is a question about how green is Shell. Yes, very interesting, and I think Saskia would like to answer that one, but let's focus a little bit on stakeholder engagement first. That's the part we were together here. And my question to the panel is, and it's one of the questions in the chat room, what about this dialogue between the stakeholders? I heard you say there are several ways to do it. You could have a legal agreement between all the parties, but you could also sit on a table, you could have a co-creation process, whatever. Do you have any experience or did the research give you any remarks about this? Who can I give the floor for that question? Still some thinking here, I see.
I can talk to that if you like. what we found is that there's two things here, right? So if I understand the question correctly, there's something about the format and setup of such a conversation or dialogue, if you will. And that could be indeed with a legal setup, it could be in some partnership setup. But for me, perhaps more importantly than that is the mindset that you have when you go into these engagements. So I mentioned it a little bit in my presentation, but this is all about listening and trying to understand and looking at where you share common ground. And that might sound obvious, but all too often when we are listening, we're already thinking about our own opinion and how we might differ and what arguments we should use. So it's actually quite hard to look at the things that connect you rather than looking at the things that separate you. But if you manage to do that, and if you find that you are working towards at least a common goal, conversation becomes a lot easier. And then from there on, you will find that there are ways to, if you want to formalize a partnership or engagement in another way. So for me, it starts really with the mindset and intent that you have. And from there on, you can form your team, you can make sure your field is ready, and you can start playing.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Any other panelists who would like to contradict this, of course? That's what I like. No, you can adhere to it. Karin, could you unmute yourself?
No contradiction here. So I just wanted to confirm this. So the initial results of our survey research that showed that there is indeed a relation between the motivation or the ambition, and mainly the companies who start working with stakeholders because it pays off. So a very business case minded approach, which is not harmful in itself, but it can be questioned if you, from that perspective, will be able to focus on the more do good sustainable development goals, or if you really remain focusing on the do no harm or the SDGs, which are much closer related to your company. So, but we see that companies who are in the because it pays off motivation mode, that they are mainly within the consultation and optimistically dialogue approach, but not in the partnership. So it depends indeed on your motivation, the way you work with your stakeholders. That's just what I wanted to add.
Yeah, okay, Stephen?
Small addition. I think apart from the North Star, this common objective, it's key who is around the table, the persons, the individuals, not the institutions, the individuals. This is all about trust.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, indeed. So we have a mix of way how to legally form it, but you are saying the motivation, it's the culture, perhaps. That was a remark in my introductory remarks. We are cautious not to export the Dutch culture too much, because every country has its own culture, but perhaps we have some experience of failures and successes to exchange. So therefore we thought this meeting, this international meeting, could cause some interest by all participants, and according to the chats, they do. And it's not, a lot of lessons we learned are not very particularly Dutch. I believe they are very humanistic. So it's the humans around the table, as Steven just said. This brings me to the conclusion. And Brechtje didn't join us because we were eager to hear her final part. There are quite some questions in the chat also that we could respond to in writing. So now I think Marco Swan of our team will post now in the chat a hyperlink where we ask you to perhaps also to respond to some questions, but where you can write down anything you would like to add to us. And there is a final last question for you, Mr. Ambassador, if you're still in the call. Where do you think the Netherlands can make the biggest contribution. But I see Brechtje back in the meeting as well. Let's first see if Brechtje, who did, of course, a tremendous effort to come back in our conversation, if you could finish what you were saying about your company. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do hear you. I'm really sorry. I was sharing a screen. I don't know where it went wrong because I didn't get a notification that something went wrong. What did you?
Well, I had the impression, but that's because I'm the chair, that you were almost finishing. But
yeah, I think so, but I don't know where it fell out. But what I was telling is that we focus on 3 SDGs mainly, 9, 11, and 12. And for 12, to become a circular company, we very much engaged first with stakeholders to come to set the target. Then we engaged very much with NGOs to develop a program how to become a circular company. And the biggest step that we took is realizing that we very much need our stakeholders, the suppliers, because we will never ever get a circular company if our suppliers don't work with us. So that's when what we invented was a circular manifesto, because we didn't want to make contracts, because it takes too long if all the legal people involved will also join forces. And what we wanted was a commitment from suppliers to go onto the journey with us, and together during this journey find out what it means to become a circular company and how we can make that into real circular products and services. And the first 2 steps took 2 years. It took 2 years to involve 17 suppliers to join us. And then since last year, we started developing products, which we are also actually delivering to our customers these days.
Okay.
And
yeah,
this is merely summarizing my presentation.
Yeah, well, this is a great, very concrete ending of your presentation, indeed. So thank you so much to take all the effort to come back in the conversation. And I see some extra questions, but now our time has gone. I'm very sorry to say. But we assemble all the questions, very concrete questions, in the chat. The only thing you available in the chat, we have much more than 225 in our meeting. So please look at the chat at the emails, or I could say the remarks of Marco Swan and Nicolette, who give you the Survey Monkey hyperlink. And as a gift, after you filled in 2 minutes for 5 questions, I think your present is that you get the presentations and extra answers to questions you raised in the chat room. So with this, I would like to thank all the panelists by preparing and answering also and presenting your story, answering the questions, and hope to see you all again, and also the people who will respond in the Survey Monkey we just shared with you. Thank you very much and goodbye.